Here are my top waiver wire pickups for Week 5, coming right up. And what is up, everyone? You're listening to the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast for Tuesday, October 6, 2020. And I am Chip, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple and Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So please hit subscribe so you don't miss any more episodes and to help support the show. So today, on today's episode, we're talking about all of my top waiver wire pickups for going into Week 5. And, some of these names are going to be just names that obviously had good weeks. You always want to go into waiver wire claims on trying to figure out who exactly is the best pickup. So I'm going to go over that in a brief moment, but let's go into some of the news that took place on Monday. Now, a surprise fire happened. Bill O'Brien of the Houston Texans was fired on Monday, and we all kind of figured that this was going to happen. They're not getting off to a good start. Obviously, Bill O'Brien has done a lot of questionable things, like trade away, DeAndre Hopkins, trade away a lot of first-round picks for other, supporting cast, and it just hasn't been working out. So if you guys didn't know, Bill O'Brien was the head coach of the Texans and the GM, so he pretty much had all the personnel, decision-making to himself, and he really put that team behind when they were actually a decent team and they were a playoff team, and it just got to the point where they're just going backwards right now, and it sucks because you're wasting talent like Deshaun Watson. J.J. Watt, has been a focal point on that team for ever since he got drafted. They traded away, Clowney, and I don't know, just a lot of weird things going on. So hopefully this turns around the Texans, but Romeo Crennel is going to take over for the interim time, and then going forward, I hope that they can find some identity. I really like Romeo Crennel. He's a defensive coordinator, but he definitely is a good coach. I think a lot of players like playing for him, so hopefully they're able to turn that around. And then going into some of the injury news, the biggest name, we found out some results for Austin Eckler. Now, he suffered a grade 2 hamstring strain, so this is really good news. We didn't know exactly how the injury was going to be, how it was going to play out, knowing on Monday how severe it was just based on the game on Sunday, because he was unable to put any weight on. He left the game on crutches and wearing a brace. So for him to only have a grade 2 strain, which is really good news. If you guys don't know what the different strains of muscle is, you have 3 grades. You got grade 1, which is a minor hamstring strain, which is minimal time away for and missing games. A grade 2 is a little more significant, and then grade 3 is pretty much you're going to be out for a very long time. So with that being the case, a grade 2 is very good news. He's only supposed to be out 4 to 6 weeks. This was my initial prediction on Monday's episode. I felt like, without knowing the situation, knowing that he was going to miss out with multiple weeks, I felt like 4 to 6 weeks was a good range, and that looks like that's what he's going to be on. But he's on, IR with designation to return. So he's definitely going to come back this season if everything goes right, if his recovery goes right. But obviously you're going to be missing some time with them. So obviously this is a great episode to listen to all the people that you could replace them with. Now going to the Cleveland Browns, Nick Chubb, same thing. He had an MRI done on Monday. He's being put on IR because he's in the several weeks. He's dealing with an MCL injury. Same thing. There's different grades of MCL injuries. I didn't see anything disclosed on how bad the MCL injury was. However, they generally don't do surgical procedures for this. So with that being the case, he should be missing, at least 4 to 6 weeks as well. But the good thing is he's not going to be out for the season. The good thing is if you have Nick Chubb, you have a handcuff. If you're smart enough to pick up Kareem Hunt or some other players that were available, you're going to get him back. So if you're able to, just weather the storm and then hopefully make that playoff push later on in the fantasy season, he'll be available for you to be able to bring home that championship. But it just stinks to see these guys go down. Every week so far, we've seen a big name go down. I just hope this trend stops because we're running out of players to talk about. We're running out, all of our stars that we look forward to watching every week are being injured, and it just sucks to see so many good players go down. And then in New England, the New England Patriots put Sony Michel on IR with a quad injury, which is very weird. He had over 100 yards last week, and then this week he gets put on IR, so he's going to be at least missed 4 weeks. However, with this being the case, this makes Damien Harris so much more of a interesting pickup. I'll be talking about him briefly later on in a little bit in the podcast when I reveal all my names. But Damien Harris, I mean, he was a guy that I had stashed in my Dynasty League. I stashed him and put him on my IR, and now I have to take him off my IR, so I got to drop somebody. But I'm glad I picked him up because I like having a lot of depth, especially in a Dynasty League when you have a deep bench. It's always nice to have these running backs just in case something happens, because we have no idea on if there's going to be any more teams that deal with COVID that are going to miss games, or games are going to be rescheduled, or whatever the case may be. So I think having a lot of depth on your roster is going to make a lot of sense, especially if you decide to hold more players than usual. Like, I think it's one of those seasons where it's just best to have as many people as you can on your roster that are going to be handcuffs or whatnot, or even carrying a second quarterback if you're only playing in a one quarterback league. You just want to try to have the upper hand on your opponents, and I think it's worthy to figure out the players that are on your rosters that are just dead weight. You're going to release those guys and try to pick up guys that that will give you a good week if one of your players is missing because of an injury or COVID. So before going into all the waiver wire pickups for Week 5, let's talk about the Monday night matchups. So we had 2 games on Monday night. We obviously had the Patriots and Chiefs. It got postponed from Sunday to Monday night. And then we had the Falcons versus the Packers. And honestly, starting with the Patriots versus the Chiefs, this was an ugly game. Very uncharacteristic of what we usually see from the Chiefs offense. The Patriots did not look good at all on offense. So just an overall kind of a quiet fantasy game for the players that you had in this game. The Chiefs won 26-10. And Patrick Mahomes, this game, he threw for 236 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, he obviously had a decent outing. He had another 28 yards rushing. A quiet game from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He had 64 yards on the ground, and they had 3 receptions for 27 yards. Travis Kelce, he had a decent game. From a PPR standpoint, he had 3 receptions for 70 yards. But the story of the game was just, man, how bad Brian Hoyer was and Jarrett Stidham. I mean, it's crazy to see how much Cam Newton makes the Patriots better, and how him not playing really makes that offense look just one-dimensional. So I think that the Patriots cannot wait to get Cam Newton back. We saw tonight how valuable Cam Newton is and how much he's able to give you so many different looks, how he makes the receivers better. It was just a bad game overall for the Patriots. But the one bright spot that came out of this game was that it was Damien Harris. Damien Harris ran 17 times for 100 yards. So he led the backfield in rush attempts. He had a nice run, for 41 yards. So I think Damien Harris, I'm going to be talking to him, like I said, I'm going to be talking about him a little bit later, but he's the one bright spot. I think that from a pure rushing standpoint, this is the juggle that we have with the New England Patriots backfield. We have 1 week like last week, Rex Burkhead was a massive fantasy option that was left unplayed unless you're in real deep leagues. And then you got this week where he still got the rushing attempts, but he didn't get the targets. He only had 1 target on Monday night. So James White came back in. He had 8 targets for 7 receptions and 38 yards. So this is what I said in last week's podcast about picking up Rex Burkhead and trying to, start him in your lineup this week, is that we all have to consider that James White was not playing because of family issues or personal reasons because of what's going on with his family. And then Rex Burkhead is the guy that took that role. So obviously he had a good game. And once we see James White back in the lineup, we saw Rex Burkhead not be as effective. So I think this is the things that you have to pay attention to and consider when you're spending fab budgets on certain players and everything. But all in all, this game was, like I said, there wasn't really a lot of scoring that took place until, in the fourth quarter. You had Tyreek Hill had a touchdown, and you had, like I said, Mecole Hardman had a touchdown later on in the game. So overall, that was the Patriots and Chiefs game. And then moving on to the Falcons versus the Packers. man, the Falcons continue to look just bad. I hate saying that, but it is what it is. They're 0-4 right now. They lost to the Packers 30-16. And on the other side of this, the Packers look great. The Packers have scored now in 4 games. They've scored 30 points or more. Aaron Rodgers continues to look good. He had 4 touchdowns on Monday night. He's making all the haters just eat crow right now, because everyone's kind of writing him off this year because of last year and on how he was and how he looked like he was on the downside of his career. But Aaron Rodgers continues to look good. Matt Ryan, an ugly game from him. He only had 285 yards, had no touchdowns. Todd Gurley, he had a good game. He had 2 touchdowns rushing. He had 16 carries, so he continues to get the bulk of the carries. But he's only averaging 3.6 yards per carry, so he's still getting the touchdown. So he's not killing your fantasy lineup. He's definitely contributing, but you would like to see him get a little more yardage. Aaron Jones, this was a very quiet game with Aaron Jones. He did have a touchdown, but he usually is the one that stands out because of Devontae Adams out. Allen Lazard was out, so every time Devontae Adams was not playing, especially last year, Aaron Jones picked up the slack. So we saw. I know it sounds kind of like a quiet game, but he did have 71 yards on the ground. He did add another 5 receptions, 40 yards. So all in all, it was a good outing for Aaron Jones. It's just not as that blow up game that we used to see him having, just when he's really the only option. But I will say this is that the reason why I think that Aaron Jones didn't have a massive receiving game and have just a big fantasy game, just because we have to talk about Robert Tonyan, man. He continues to be a guy that he's proven the fact that he can be a reliable player. I mean, he has 6 receptions for 98 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, this is now 3 games in a row that he scored a touchdown. And I know he is benefiting from the fact that Devontae Adams is out, and then obviously Allen Lazard, but I think the Packers found a good tight end, and he is athletic. He just looks great. So I think that this is a guy that is becoming one of my must pickups for week 5. I mean, he definitely, especially if you need tight end help. But the downside of that, he's on a bye week in week 5. But definitely a guy to add to your roster. All right, so let's move on to all the top waiver wire pickups for week 5. Now, I like going in order by position. So the first position I'm going to be talking about is quarterback. And the first guy on my list I'm going to talk about is Gardner Minshew. I know that he had a bad week 3. I know that if you were listening to the podcast, I had him as a streamer, in week 3, and he just had a bad outing. But I think that was kind of an anomaly of it, because in the last 3 to 4 weeks, right? So 3 out of 4 weeks of the NFL season, he's scored over 20 fantasy points. So he's definitely has been a streamable and decent option for you, especially if you're out Big Ben this week, you're out Ryan Tannehill, Cam Newton, he's definitely a playable piece. So I think that Gardner Minshew continues to be a good add. He plays Houston this week. I think that's going to be a plus matchup for him. So if you're in the same situation where you need to plug somebody in because you're missing somebody, I think you do far worse than Gardner Minshew, but he deserves to be added and be a streamable asset for your roster. And then going on to Teddy Bridgewater, he had a great game on Sunday. He had his best fantasy game all season. It looks like the Carolina Panthers are starting to get things clicking on offense. So very good game from him. He plays Atlanta in week 5, which obviously that's good for fantasy quarterbacks, because you just saw Aaron Rodgers throw for 4 touchdowns against them, and Atlanta just cannot stop the pass. They just can't stop anybody. So I think that Teddy Bridgewater becomes a good option for week 5. And then last, I think Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. He plays New Orleans this week, but this guy, I know Joe Burrow has been getting the attention of, being the best rookie quarterback based on what his draft position was and everything like that. But Justin Herbert has become a very just surprising player this year. Being surprised, having a surprise start, because Tyrod Taylor got his lung punctured by the doctor. And then he goes in and plays. He throws over 300 yards in his first game, has a touchdown and a rushing touchdown. And then just what he did against the Bucs defense on Sunday, he had 2 long bombs that, were great throws. He threw for another 300 yards. I mean, he looks poised. He looks like he belongs in the NFL. And I don't think Tyrod Taylor has any chance of getting his job back once he's healthy enough, if he's able to come back this year. But, Justin Herbert, he definitely deserves an add on your roster. And then moving on to the running back position, I think one of the main adds this week is Justin Jackson of the Chargers. When we saw Austin Eckler go down, we know that he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks. You know that you're going to be able to get enough playing time with Justin Jackson because all they have is Joshua Kelly. Joshua Kelly is that bigger back. Justin Jackson is definitely a back that he definitely can run between the tackles, but he also is a good pass catcher, especially when you're playing a PPR format. But Jackson is a guy that I would add to my roster. Even if you don't need running back help, you want to take any option away from the guy who does have Eckler because you always try to find ways to weaken your opponent's roster. So Jackson is a good add this week. And then going on to Arizona, I think Chase Edmonds is a good add. We saw that Drake, I didn't know this when I was recording the podcast yesterday, but Kenyon Drake left the game early with a chest injury. I don't know what it is, but that's 3 players that I've seen. You had DJ Chark, you had Joe Mixon, now you have Kenyon Drake all having their chest injured. I don't know what's going on with everybody. I don't know if they need to do like just more bench press or whatnot, but it's one of those things where this is the 3rd guy that's has the similar injury. But I think that, we're seeing Kenyon Drake. We know that he's talented. We know that he definitely can put up fancy numbers, but he's just not getting it done. So if he's going to miss any time this year, obviously Chase Edmonds becomes a must add. And then going on to Cleveland, because we saw Nick Chubb, go down, Ernest Johnson is going to be a good add as well because obviously that the Cleveland Browns are a very high rush offense. Like they're good. That's what they do. They want to pound the ball, and they're being very successful doing that with Chubb and with Kareem Hunt. Both players are very fancy relevant. And then now I think that obviously Kareem Hunt becomes the starter, and I think that Ernest Johnson becomes the complement to him. Obviously, I think that Kareem Hunt's the guy you're going to start every week, but Johnson had 13 carries for 95 yards on Sunday. He out-carried Kareem Hunt, so it's not like he wasn't being used. I think we saw who's going to be the backup now that Nick Chubb is out. So definitely a guy that you could probably grab for pretty cheap off your roster, unless you have you have to go. Obviously, if you're going to be going against a Nick Chubb owner, so if that's the case, then you have to determine what your budget is based on that, how much you're not going to, how much you're willing to spend on somebody. But he's definitely a guy that is a good add as well. And then I mentioned this earlier, but Damian Harris, if he's available, I had mentioned him a couple weeks ago that he was a guy that you should add. And I put his name out there just kind of floating around like, look, it's better to get on him now before we get to pay any fab off for him, because if you're able to get these guys early without having to pay all the fab, then it's always going to be good for you. So, Damian Harris, like I said, he had 100 yards rushing on Monday night, so it's a guy that he could go on the radar because of the backfield in New England, but I think that he's definitely worth an add. And then in Tampa, I think Keyshawn Vaughn, he's a guy that did well on Sunday. He had a receiving touchdown. The thing about this is obviously Ronald Jones is the starter because of what's going on in Tampa. Ronald Jones is not going to be getting any playing time taken away from him from Keyshawn Vaughn, but you got to think about the role of Keyshawn Vaughn. He is more of a pass catcher. He's a more natural pass catcher than Ronald Jones, and you have to think we have now LaShawn McCoy is out. He's going to be out for a few weeks because of his ankle injury, and the Bucs play on Thursday night, so obviously he's not going to be available, McCoy, and then obviously Leonard Fournette's not going to be available. So if you need a spot start for Week 5, I would, if you have no other option, I think Keyshawn Vaughn is a very interesting add. So that's just my take on that. And then now going to the wide receiver position, the top wide receiver pickup on my list this week is Tim Patrick. A lot of people might have forgotten about him because they played on Thursday night, but he had a very good game. He had 6 receptions for 113 yards and a touchdown. You got to think, all they have is Jerry Jeudy right now. So you got to think Cortland Sutton's out for the season. Noah Fant is injured, so that gives all the targets to Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick. So I know they have Deshaun Hamilton there as well, but I think that Tim Patrick, he's been, ever since those guys went down, he's been actually balling out. So he may be a quiet guy you can add for the cheap, because sometimes people forget about Thursday night players that go off. So and then Going on, to the New Orleans Saints, I think Tre'Quan Smith is a guy that you need to add. Right now he had a great game on Sunday. He had 2 touchdowns. I mean, he is getting 14% of the target share. Now, I'm very cautious with this one because obviously Emmanuel Sanders had a good game as well. And the difference is that Tre'Quan Smith got the touchdowns, right? And in most leagues, Emmanuel Sanders is already owned. But once Michael Thomas comes back, I think we're going to see a lot different, target share, obviously. But he definitely is somebody, if you need a spot start, he's definitely a guy you can add. I don't think, in my opinion, Michael Thomas is coming back for week 5. I think he's going to come back in week 7 after their bye. So he may be a good spot start this week. And then for Tampa Bay, Scotty Miller. Scotty Miller, I've been talking about every single week on this show. I think he deserves to be added. He led the team yesterday with 5 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown. I know Mike Evans. Mike Evans has the most receiving touchdowns for the Bucs, but Scotty Miller leads the team in receiving yards. So Scotty Miller continues to be Brady's favorite target. He is the Wes Welker of this offense. He's the Julian Edelman. So I think anybody that you can attach to Tom Brady, especially in a slot role, I think makes sense. Now, does that change when Chris Godwin comes back? Absolutely, because Chris Godwin plays more in the slot. But like I said, right now we're dealing with a lot of injuries. We're dealing with the unknown things of COVID and everything. So Scotty Miller is definitely a must-add for me. And then Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Laviska Shenault Jr. He had a good game on Sunday. He had 14.1 PPR points. He has 6 receptions for 86 yards. Now, he definitely benefits from DJ Chark being back in the lineup. This guy's a very talented wide receiver. He continues to be part of the offense, obviously. So I think that he deserves to be added. And then last, I think I talked about him last week, T. Higgins. So T. Higgins had another good game. He was 4 for 77. He didn't have the touchdowns like he did last week, but he continues to have some production. So far that's 2 good PPR outings in a row. And honestly, I think the reason why T. Higgins matters is because it's clear that Tyler Boyd is the number 1 receiver there. And A.J. Green, I don't know what to do with him. I think that he is now on that trend of being dropped. I think having such a poor outing, I was defending him the last few weeks because I felt like him and Joe Burrow were close and connecting on multiple touchdowns. And it's just not happening. So, I don't know. I think that I may give him 1 more week to kind of see what he does, but it looks like A.J. Green is a droppable piece right now on your roster. And then now going on to tight end. I only have 2 tight ends this week, and the number 1 tight end that's a must-add for me is Robert Tonyan. Like I had mentioned earlier, he had 3 receiving touchdowns on Monday night. Now that's 5 touchdowns in 4 games for him. He obviously is benefiting from no Davante Adams and no Allen Lazard, but I do think the way he's being implemented to the offense, he's a guy that, regardless of Davante Adams being there and Allen Lazard coming back later on in the season, I think Robert Tonyan deserves to be added, and I think he can be a consistent player for you going forward because this offense is scoring points. I mean, like I said, they've scored 30 or more points in 4 straight games. I know not every game's going to be like that, but he's definitely worth the add. Like I said earlier, he does have a bye week, so you won't be able to play him this week. And then they play the Bucs the following week after that. Now, just because I watch a lot of Bucs games, the Bucs are very poor. They definitely cannot guard the tight end. So especially if they have to play against someone like Davante Adams and MVS and then Robert Tonyan, they got to deal with Aaron Jones. I think this could be a sneaky game for Tonyan against the Bucs. So definitely a guy that you're going to add, but unfortunately you can't use him, in week 5. Then my last tight end is Mo Alley Cox. He's been a guy that once Jack Doyle went down, he's been, doing very well. He's scored 2 games in a row now, and he does play Cleveland in week 5, which is a good matchup for him. He is, so I want to say that he is Phillip Rivers' favorite target. Like I said, Phillip Rivers loves the tight end, so that's good news. The bad news is that there's Jack Doyle and then there's Trey Burton. So Trey Burton just got activated on the roster, and then you got Jack Doyle. So is he going to have to fight for targets for being fantasy relevant? I don't think so. I think they're seeing that Mo Alley Cox can be that number 1 tight end for him. He obviously is leading the tight end with all the he leads the tight ends in targets for the Colts. So I think he's definitely a worth an add. And I would say this as kind of a bonus tight end. I know that the Bucs don't really use the tight end much right now. We haven't seen it very, very much, but OJ Howard is out for the season with the torn Achilles. So does that make Gronk more relevant? Did somebody drop Gronk in your leagues because Gronk was having a poor first half of the season, right? The first quarter of the season. If he's there, he definitely is a must add to me, because I think that they're gonna be down Chris Godwin for another game. They're going to be down. Mike Evans has a bum ankle. He hurt his ankle, so he's not going to miss any time. It doesn't look like, but they're coming on a short week. So I wonder if this can be a week where Gronk gets implemented into the game plan a little bit more. Just because now all the Bucs have Gronk and they have Cameron Brate. So we did see actually Cameron Brate and OJ Howard have touchdowns on Sunday. So I'm wondering if Gronk is one of those guys. If he happens to be available in your league, if somebody dropped him, he could be worth an ad just to kind of see how that plays out. So those are my top waiver wire picks for week 5. Now it's going to be interesting to kind of see how your leagues, determine who they want, because you're definitely going to have to pay up for some of these names. I think obviously Justin Jackson becomes the most expensive guy. I think it's going to be taken off the board first, off the waiver wire, and then I think depending on what's going on with Kenny and Drake, Chase Edmonds becomes an interesting name. I think Robert Tonyan, because he had a blow-up game on Monday night, I think he becomes one of those more expensive ads of the week. But other than that, I think that you can really get these guys on the cheaper side. But it depends on your roster structure. It depends on what you need. So you may have to go all out for some of these players because you have the budget, but then you're out some of these players that are dealing with injury or of COVID, because we still don't know if the Titans are going to play in week 5. So if you're a Derrick Henry owner, and then I can't remember who the Titans play in week 5, but it's just one of those things where you have to have a contingency plan. So just be careful and just make sure you have some backups. All right. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, and share this podcast. On the next episode on Thursday, I'll be previewing the Thursday night football game. It's the Bucs versus the Bears this week. So don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss that episode. And if you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us over on Twitter and Facebook at the Gridiron Pod. You can find us on Instagram at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, and we'll see you on Thursday.